You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of experts on this show, and I think it's time that you guys hear from Bryan Callen, Hunter Motz alone. I'm unadulterated. I'm talking about unadulterated. I'm talking about none of this dilution, if you know what I mean. Let's get to the source.
Enough of other people talking.
Let's hear us. Let's get to us. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, and I might call some of my friends on my phone and just put them on speaker and hear what they have to say about everything. Hunter, you're pretty good at getting putting things into context. Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's our podcast, folks.
Do you want to talk about that and why?
Well, you and I were talking about how you can have one guy on who's a sharp profile and who speaks eloquently. Michael Malice is a good example of saying, I'm an anarchist. And then you'll have someone like Jared Diamond on who says, well, not so fast. If you look at ancient cultures, we evolve into societies for a reason. There has to be things like conflict resolution. You should probably have a pretty strong army and police force in case you have to go to war, in case another country decides we're going to take that area over for us. These things require a certain amount of central organization. When you are in a society as a human being, you do have to enter a contract to an extent. I don't care if it's group of 10 anarchists, you're going to have rules for the bathroom eventually. You're going to have rules for where you place your waste, how loud you are when you're trying to sleep, how well you can cooperate when you're starving and you have to catch and trap an animal. These are things that happen naturally. And yes, I agree that we are products of our biology, but part of our biology may very well be the need to organize, the need to delineate
and
authority.
The ability to organize. I mean, that's
100%.
I think that's the thing. I think that Michael Malice needs to be more committed to his big ideas. If he would commit more to the idea that we are products of our biology, then the question becomes, what is our biology? Then you really have to understand what it is that makes us special. And part of it is that, and this is Robin Dunbar's work, that primates naturally exist in certain group sizes. Yeah. And for human beings, that group size is thought to be about 150 people, right? We are naturally tribal.
Yes.
And the amazing thing about our brains is that not only can we exist in group sizes of 150, but we're able to create levels of organization that are even greater than 150 individuals. We're able
thanks to agriculture and things like that.
Absolutely. And, and thanks to abstractions, right? The idea that, you can have, even though this is the thing, is that there's 300 million people in the United States who think of themselves as having something in common, even though they've never met each other, right?
It's very true.
They can understand this abstraction that is America. They can understand all the abstractions of the Constitution and all that sort of stuff. And that's true for every nation, of course.
And Gail Collins was talking, I don't agree with her politics usually, but she said she breaks people down into, the political parties into the people that it's all about space. So when people have to live in close proximity and, in urban areas, cities like New York City, they tend to vote more Democratic than do people who live in Wyoming. And the reason for that is that the notion of the collective and cooperation and compromise and sacrifice and thinking about how you're going to get along with your neighbor and rules that matter, that takes on more importance because it has to. Whereas if you live on a farm in Wyoming or you live whatever, you have a lot of room, it's much easier to romanticize the notion of self-reliance. I want everybody out of my hair.
Well, but also they are more self-reliant.
Yeah.
In some sense, a farmer, right, grows his own food,
Sure.
can live on his own food and all that sort of stuff.
So you're probably going to have, that's going to affect your political point of view.
Yeah, to a certain extent. And one of the things that Jonathan Haidt talks about too is that when you have people smell bad smells, they become more conservative.
We have to get him back on because we have probably mentioned his name more than any other.
About 1 billion times.
Yeah. He's had a huge influence on the way you think. And in what sense? What were the ideas that What were the new ideas for you when you read Jonathan Haidt?
Well, I however you pronounce his name.
Yeah. Who came to my stand-up, by the way, with his lovely wife. I was very, very flattered.
And he's very nice. I mean,
great guy.
When we had Caitlin Dowdy on, I mentioned his work to her as well, and I connected them over email, and, he was such a sweetheart about the whole thing. But to answer your question, I mean, I think what Haidt's work represents is I think it's part of the Holy Trinity, really, right? Which is Daniel Kahneman's work, right? Jonathan Haidt's work, and then the Damasio's work. They all basically, they're coming from very different perspectives, right? Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist who has primarily influenced, economics. Jonathan Haidt is talking about moral psychology, and then you have the Damasios who study neurophysiology. But all of them together basically add up to this Copernican shift in our understanding of ourselves. Because since the Enlightenment, we've really been so obsessed with reason, right? Right. Reason is everything. Reason has given us science, it's given us technology, it's given us all of this stuff. The consequence of that is that we become increasingly embarrassed by the fact that we're emotional, right? Emotions are seen as a sign of weakness. We shove them off to the side. The answer to...
That's right. My father, God bless him, would always say, don't get emotional. A man wasn't supposed to be emotional because it does get in the way of rational choices, etc.
But the genius of Haidt's work in particular is that what he reveals is that people are emotional almost all of the time. And then after they're emotional, they come up with reasons to justify why their emotions are true. And they believe that their rational thinking is rational, but it's actually emotional thinking that's being disguised. And so that's so much of what you have going on is that if you look at, for example, in Righteous Mind, Haidt's book does this very well. When you have Republicans and Democrats arguing about things, they're not arguing, they grab for facts to justify their points, but really what they're arguing about is two competing moral points of view, neither of which is wrong, right? I mean, essentially, the Democratic point of view is
take care of the less fortunate
and all that sort of stuff, and who's going to say that's wrong? And the Republican point of view is don't steal, right? Which is, both of those things are morally true. You can't, part of the reason why they're not able to make any progress is because you can't resolve that argument morally. And that's why when we had Thomas Woods on and he was saying, morality is important and all of this sort of stuff. Yes, but morality is often used to justify two utterly competing policies. And so you can't necessarily rely on morality as a guidepost to figure out your policy.
Well, for that matter, I mean, even the Nazis,
of course,
used a twisted notion of what morality was. But, these Jews are part of the problem. Let's get rid of them, the homosexuals and the gypsies, and everything will be right in the world.
And part of Haidt's point as well is that, the morality is the same. Like, it's that desire for purity and cleanliness, which, you find recurring not just in the Nazis and the Stalinists,
and
but
the Wahhabi Islamists,
and also, of course, in the United States. Yeah. You know what I mean? We have to, Washington is a cesspool, and we have to clean it out, and da-da-da-da. So, you have these basically these moral intuitions that ultimately drive your choices. But I think what's really important, and the reason why I say Copernican moment, is that for the last few hundred years, we've thought that reason was the center and that emotion orbited around it. And now the order has been restored, and we understand that emotion is at the center of who we are. It is the core of our being. And then off to the edges is reason. It's this tiny little thing.
So the tiger is riding us. We're not riding the tiger.
Exactly. Or, to use Haidt's example, right, it's the rider and the elephant, right, where you have the large elephant, which is the emotional systems, and then you have the tiny reason sitting on top. And it's not that the reason can't alter the motions of the elephant, right, but its ability to alter those motions is fairly limited.
But we're so unforgiving of people who can't control the elephant. I mean, in this society, if you eat too much and you're fat, some things we're more forgiving of. I think it's interesting that if you have a weakness and you eat too much and you make yourself fat, if you're a gambler, if you're a drug addict, we kind of have more sympathy. If you commit infidelity, if you can't keep your dick in your pants, you just try being a sympathetic character in a movie to women.
No.
You will get written off. But part of that might be because you're hurting somebody else, but it's just interesting that it's the same issue, just with a different
But it's not to say that, I mean, this is the thing. How many lives have been ruined by compulsive gamblers, right?
A lot,
you can destroy a family
That's
that way
right.
very easily.
That's right.
You know?
But we seem to have more sympathy for one than the other. There's a lot of shame attached to sex and all. But that's a different topic.
But that's also, but I think that's the thing is I mean, firstly, you know, if you're looking at those mechanisms that we now understand for impulse control, so much of it is about understanding and recognizing and being comfortable with the fact that you have that impulse to cheat or to gamble or whatever. And, you know, understanding the power of the elephant and then figuring out ways to,
steer the elephant in the right direction.
Nudge it slowly in the right direction and over time train it to do what you want it to do.
That certainly becomes a product of, or supposed to be, the difference between one who is mature, one who is immature, one who has character, one who does not, one who has, and by the same token, we can define character as self-control, one who has gained self-mastery, self-control, and someone who's not yet there. That's really, that I guess, being able to nudge the elephant in the right direction or control the elephant or put it to sleep is really a product of what we would consider character, maturity, wisdom, all that stuff, right?
Right, but these are not things that we talk about in general. You know,
No.
I mean, Martin Seligman, part of the point he makes, I can't remember in which book it is, but he talks about the fact that, you know, the Victorians used to talk a lot about character and that it has become very unfashionable. And there are good reasons why it's become unfashionable, because what happened is that, you know, when it was like with the right character you can do anything, well, then at a certain point you start blaming the inner city poor for being the inner city poor, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, you just have a bad character. Yeah. And so, you know...
Or by the way, you create a very suppressive society like in Germany, very civilized on the surface, and when nobody's looking, shit gets pretty weird.
Yeah. So there's a reason why there was that reaction against character, but now the pendulum has swung so far the other way where, you know, we don't talk about character, we don't talk about wisdom, we don't talk about virtue, we don't talk about culture mattering, even though it clearly does. You know, all of those sort of soft aspects, traditionally soft aspects, you know, emotion, culture, all of these things are off the table. And now it's, you know, very much the focus is you want to fix education. It's big data, it's technology, it's tablets, it's all of this sort of stuff.
Money.
Yeah, and more resources. And I was thinking about this actually between this podcast and the last one. And, you know, the funny thing is that this is not the first time we've heard about big data. If you remember, Robert McNamara was the ultimate proponent of big data.
Really?
And yeah, I mean, that's what McNamara did. He worked for the Office of Statistical Services during World War II and used data to improve the efficiency of bomber runs and all of that sort of stuff. And then he was pulled in from that to go and turn Ford around, which he did very, very, very successfully. Because
Ford Motor Company.
Ford Motor Company, because it was very poorly run. And then after that, he became the Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War. And he thought that war was purely a matter of statistical analysis, big data, and that we were going to analyze and, you know, figure out how to most effectively use things like Agent Orange and saturation bombing and statistics.
It's so funny how you stick to your training. You sink to the level of your training. It's what Barb Oakley talked about. Unless you work very hard, your inner geography stays the same. You're going to think through problems the same way. You're going to apply what you learned over here. It's kind of like what Jim Seymour was talking about. Look, I was really good in the jungle. You dropped me in Israel, I'd be a babe in the woods.
Done.
That skill set that worked over here doesn't work over there.
And that's what John Nagel was talking about, is that the skill set that worked in World War II did not work in Vietnam. And McNamara was the driving force. They called him, he was one of the whiz kids.
Yes.
And he was the driving force.
One of the wise men, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, the point was big data was going to allow us to win the war because we had these massive computers and they were going to analyze everything. Well, when you watch McNamara in The Fog of War, he's very clear why we got out of the Cuban Missile Crisis successfully and why Vietnam was a failure. And the difference is empathy. Because we empathized with the Soviets, we understood what their psychological and emotional needs were, and so we found a solution that allowed us to find our way out of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We did not empathize with the Vietnamese people. we failed to understand that they saw this as a war of conquest, a desire for us to exploit them, which wasn't our actual goal. And we failed to understand that they saw this not as part of some domino chain effect, but as
So then what is the answer?
The answer is emotion. It's the core of who we are. I mean, why part of the reason why I wanted to have John Nagel on is A, because he's great, but part of the reason why he's so great is he understands the importance of hearts and minds.
Yeah.
If you want to win an insurgency, you can't, and, when you read his book, Learning to Eat House Soup with a Knife, you can't win those wars if you're only measuring death toll. If you measure death toll, then you're going to end up thinking that you won the Tet Offensive.
Yeah.
When actually you lost it because you alienated the Vietnamese people forever.
Yeah.
And so that's the point is that, even in education, we're focused on dollars spent. Mark Zuckerberg gave $100 million. Well, great, but that's not the problem. The problem is not resources. The PISA scores, which are what measure, international test performance, say that very clearly. We had our asses kicked by the Republic of Vietnam, which has a per capita GDP lower than the Republic of Congo.
Wow.
So if a country that is poorer than the Republic of Congo has better test performance than you do, then how can you really say that it's resources that's
You're
the
talking
problem?
about in academically recently.
In the United States. This happened last year, yeah. So
Motivation.
It's motivation.
Yeah.
And where does motivation comes from? Motivation comes from what you believe.
Well, you've been, well, I never thought about that. You were talking about how, I think it was the article you sent me about gun control. And one of the problems, and it was Arlen Specter who was probably talking about, the senator, and I think that was it. And he said, the problem with people who are trying to enforce gun controls, they're talking to NRA people and people who own guns, and the message they're sending, true or not, is, I don't like you. And the minute you look at somebody who owns guns or is a member of the NRA or whatever it might be, and you say, you gun nuts need laws, what you're really saying is, I don't like you. And the minute you say that, I'm going, I don't like you, brother.
That's right.
And then the debate just dies.
Yeah, it was Grover Norquist.
Oh, it's Grover Norquist. Okay.
But that's exactly right. When you're trying to,
and that's a very good point. I mean,
absolutely. And I think, emotionally that's something we can all understand. But, when you think that every problem is a rational problem, the problem is that you're not approaching the problem rationally.
Well,
Probably not.
When anybody's been in a relationship, a man and a woman, I don't know about man, woman, but certainly when you're a heterosexual guy and you're trying to have an argument with your girlfriend or your wife, my mistake over and over again would be, I would be trying to approach it from what I considered rational. Mm-hmm. Whereas my wife or my girlfriend or whatever was probably at that moment an emotional creature who had her own rationality. And that's where the emotion was coming from. But either way, I was never taking into account that my approach was putting her in a defensive emotional state. Mm-hmm. And we're never taught that stuff. We're just never taught that stuff.
Well, and that's the thing. We really haven't been taught
so
that.
We go like this, girls are crazy. Women are crazy.
Exactly.
But they're not.
But they're not. And the point is that, part of what we know from Haidt's work and people like Haidt is the fact that we experience naive realism, which is that we have this emotional state that's going on. We grab for facts that justify that feeling, and then we think that we are seeing reality.
Confirmation bias. And so the idea that you're actually seeing reality, we cherry pick facts. There's so many facts in the world. You can never hope to grasp all the facts. So what ends up happening is that you construct this little mythic narrative of why your feeling is true. How can you know anything, though, Hunter?
Well, but that's that's why we have science. But that's also part
because you can measure it.
Well, you can measure it, but there are only certain things that you can measure historically, and that's part of the reason why emotion hasn't been taken seriously for so long. Is that back in the 1700s, you didn't have the tools to quantify feelings. Right. Now, with MRIs, we're starting to be able to see them. There are more sophisticated tools for being able to measure these things, and now we pay attention to them and take them much more seriously. But a large part of it is that, you have to constantly be checking your own emotional status and seeing, what's really going on with you and be willing to be vulnerable, and ultimately recognize that the in terms of resolving that conflict that, you don't buy in too much to whatever it is that's coming out of anybody's mouth. you're paying much more attention to the face. Like,
Well,
what's going on emotionally?
After we did this podcast with Michael Malice, I said, as you get older, you probably start to realize you're going to use the word depends a lot more. It just depends on, you and I were talking about how basically there are two realities sometimes. Well, two realities at least that are being talked about. Let's just take, we're a blank slate. We're not a blank slate. We're products of our biology. It doesn't have to be either or. Both can complement each other. Both have something to say depending on perspective, context, the angle you take, the situation.
And emotion. Because that's the thing, what you were saying. Firstly, I mean, in terms of part of our human biology is neuroplasticity. Our brains are plastic and flexible and remain so throughout life. But the other part is that, we are emotional, psychological creatures. And if you go and you tell someone, you will never be good at this, then they're probably going to give up. Or they're going to say, screw you, I'm going to show you how good I'm going to be at this.
But that's right. Like Michael may be right that some people biologically aren't whatever, and they're never, or most people, if you talk
but
about...
Also, let's talk...
But that's not helpful when you're teaching a kid. You don't want to tell that child that, because that reality, whether it is a reality or not, is very irrelevant to the task at hand. You're trying to accomplish something, which is, hey kid, you can do this, and you don't know, like Barbara Dweck, Carol Dweck said, you cannot measure what somebody is capable of if they attack it with an open, enthusiastic, passionate mind.
That's right.
And that's, thank God, by the way.
Well, but that's the whole point is, I mean, look at what happened with the history of IQ. Alfred Binet invented the IQ test to measure where children were, not what they could be. And then what happened is that it was hijacked by, Carol Dweck's personal nemesis, and I would say mine as well, Louis Terman, who transformed the meaning of that number into a measure of absolute potential.
Yeah.
And, that's... I mean, the reality is that, he did this famous study where he, had this sample of children and they called them the termites. And they were all these children and he measured their IQs and he was like, look, it's really simple. People with the high numbers are going to be successes and the people with the low numbers are going to be failures.
Yeah.
And some of the people he missed 2 Supreme Court justices, I think.
I remember having my IQ tested when I was in 8th grade. Because I wasn't such a good student. And I don't think they ever told me what my IQ was. I think it was just okay. But my parents were savvy enough to know that it just... My father was always like, look, it's about potential, man. It's about how hard you work.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing. And, the reason why people form these conclusions are utterly baseless. I mean, when I was growing up, the belief was that you shouldn't speak more than one language around a child. And there were good scientific reasons why they thought this, because when children grow up in a multilingual environment, what ends up happening is they end up speaking later and it takes them longer to master a language, right? So measured on that basic timeline, it seems like, you shouldn't speak more than one language around a child. Fast forward to 30 years later, we now understand, it takes them longer to start speaking, but there are huge cognitive benefits to bilingualism. It's one of the best things you could do for your kids.
Right.
So my parents, being, responsible, science-minded individuals, were like, this is what the experts are saying. I trust the experts. So they didn't speak to me in either of their native languages because we lived in Brazil. And so they only spoke to me in Portuguese. And so Portuguese was my first language.
I didn't know that. Do you speak Portuguese?
Well, this is where the story goes. So then I moved to the United States, and my dad wanted me to go to a fancy kindergarten because it's New York, and New York is ridiculous. And, we went to the first place, and I proceeded to take off all my clothes in the interview because I was like, this sucks. Brazil was amazing. I want to be naked.
Good job.
And then my dad...
Probably had that tailpiece back then, too.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And so my dad took me to FAO Schwartz, and he was like, this is the largest toy store in the world. If you keep all your clothes on, you can have one toy from this place.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad. So I went to the next interview and kept my clothes on, and they admitted me, but the headmistress of the school was convinced that I was retarded because I didn't speak English.
Wow.
And so she sent me off for educational testing. She was like, I don't know that we could admit this child because he doesn't speak English. And I seem to remember, and there's some debate about this, but I seem to remember her saying something to the effect of only maids and immigrants speak Portuguese.
Jesus.
And so I became...
I mean, she's right, but still, that's so weird.
But so I became so uncomfortable with speaking Portuguese that I refused to speak the language.
Oh, boy.
At first, my mother would speak to me in Portuguese, and then, as I began
What was your mother's native language?
English.
Yeah,
but so,
I got you.
And so,
And your dad's native language was?
Dutch.
Dutch.
So, they would speak to me in Portuguese, and at first I would answer in English, and then eventually, I was so embarrassed that, when they would speak to me in Portuguese, I would ignore them.
Wow.
So, and that's because
there was shame attached to it.
There was so much shame attached to it. And that's the whole point, is that, that's the power of emotions. I forgot my first language because of emotions. And that's what people don't appreciate, is they don't realize that we are primarily emotional creatures, and we think that our choices are rational.
It certainly bears a great deal of relevance if you're going to go into another country and try to take that country where you want.
100%.
I mean, you better. That actually, as crazy as it sounds, might be at the forefront of everything.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it's at the forefront of who we are.
Well, look what we did with firing all the soldiers. Thanks a lot, Douglas Feith. I don't believe it was Bremer, and it doesn't matter. But, the ignorance of kind of saying we're going to take all these military men who that is what they do. That's their job, armed to the teeth. Their expertise is in control and power, but they could have been used. See you later. Hey, all of you. And the general was like, dude, we can keep order on the streets. If you fire me now, I have to fight you tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
But that's the thing. Rationally, what they did make sense. Because, and I'm not saying rationally, I mean, from their rational perspective, these guys are the bad guys.
Yeah.
We are the good guys. We get rid of the bad guys. How could we have the bad guys?
But that narrative I hear over and over, even
Yeah.
in the media. I mean, we are always talking in terms of, if you want to solve, I do it all the time. If you want to solve the problem, get rid of the sociopaths, right? Then Michael Malice has a different point of view. There's this idea that we have to get rid of the bad people, where that's probably the most fundamentally flawed argument in the world. It was used by the Nazis, by the communists, by everybody. Get rid of that. We talk about it today. Get rid of the Taliban. Get rid of the Iranians are crazy. Get rid of the ISIS. No.
It's the desire for purity.
Yeah.
But
also the simplification of the problem.
100%. And also, a total lack of empathy, right?
Yeah.
You haven't engaged in empathy to understand. Listen, if you grew up in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and what would you do? How would you really live your life? Because it's a really nice idea to think that you would be this massively principled individual who would stand up to the regime.
Not when those people get killed.
That's right. And the reality is that probably most of them just want a job. They're not, overly concerned with what the job is, and they probably justify to themselves in the same way that we all justify to ourselves. Well, I'm sure I do bad things too, but on balance, I'm keeping peace and order and all that sort of stuff. And it's 1,000,000 times better than whatever's happening in this other country and so on and so forth. But that's that's the lesson that McNamara had to learn the hard way, and that the country has not really learned, that humanity has not really learned, which is that, emotions are serious business. They are the core of who we are, and that most of the time when we think we're being rational, we're actually being emotional. Take 9/11, for example. Hello. Kahneman is talking about, Kahneman's whole thing is thinking fast and slow. We have our fast thinking systems, which are our rational, emotional, heuristic systems. And then we have our slow thinking system, which is the rider on top of the elephant, our reasonable systems. Well, how fast did everybody know how 9/11 had to be dealt with?
Right.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And how is it that you can possibly think that an event of that magnitude happens in a part of the world that you know very little about, and suddenly you know exactly how to deal with it?
Right.
It was an entirely emotional decision on the part of not just the Bush administration, but the country as a whole.
Yeah, I just wanted to go in there and take them out.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And we have paid.
I could taste it.
Yeah.
I didn't want peace.
No, of course. And you got your wish.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to my father, and I said, I don't understand the Balkans when the war in the Balkans happened in Herzegovina and Bosnia between the Croats, the Serbs, and the Bosnians. And I was reading these horror stories, and I was like, how could people ever do this bullshit? It's so crazy. And my father said, somebody came into your house, killed your children with a knife, what do you think you'd do? And I was like, I'd kill them. I'd kill their grandmother, I'd kill their dog, and I'd kill anybody that knew them. Like, I was young, and I was like, I would wipe out any genetic remembrance. Like, I forgot what I was even talking about. I thought he was just asking me a question, and I went fucking crazy.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, you'd kill the dog too? I was like, I'll kill everybody. I'll kill a hamster. I'll fuck, like, hey, Bri, like, way to go, you fucking idiot. This is the kind of way, Like, I know there are certain circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, when I think violence would 100% work, and I'll give you an example. In Rwanda, I could have solved that problem in a fucking heartbeat, and I would have done it like this, and I'm being dead serious. I need some helicopter gunships, and I need some crack commandos on the ground. Give me some Delta guys, some SEAL team guys, some Rangers. Give me some Marines. Fuck it. Just give me. I want shoulder launched missiles. I want RPGs, and I want fucking heavy machine guns. And just park them in front of any of those Tutsi villages. As soon as the Hutus come in with their fucking trucks and all their young guys with their machetes, you kill all of them. You kill the whole truck. You shoot a missile into their fucking faces. You blow them to smithereens. Now what happens is you video it, put it up wherever, and get the word out. If you're a bunch of dudes in a truck with machetes, you're going to die. That actually, in that circumstance, would have stopped the genocide.
Is that kind of like what ISIS did?
I don't want to talk about Hunter. The point is that there are certain circumstances when violence works, but
but you acknowledge the parallels of killing people and then videotaping it and putting it on the internet.
Well, if they're in fucking trucks with machetes and
Sure.
they're coming to kill children, I want them dead.
But listen, I mean, to validate your point, what you're I don't know that you necessarily even have to resort to killing them. The point is that if you line up that sort of firepower around the village, a UN peacekeeping force or the U.S. Army
just
or
set
whatever.
an example, though.
But what you're really talking about is exactly what Michael Malice and Thomas Woods thinks we don't need, which is for somebody to have a monopoly on violence. What you're saying is that you put these forces in, and then they become the only ones who are legitimately allowed to kill. There's essentially a Leviathan that's so large and so dominant that the fighting between Hutus and Tutsis can't happen because essentially you've created an interim temporary government.
That's okay. And by the way,
I agree.
That might be okay. That's where the UN doesn't have the teeth, but you've got to have somebody who takes action. We all know that there are certain situations that are so egregious to humanity that, I would never expect us to sit back and watch Nazi Germany happen again. We would have to liberate those camps, right?
But I think that's the thing. What you're talking about is monopoly on violence, which is the first stage in progress of any society, and that's a good thing. There should be some sort of organization that essentially is there and, serves as the Leviathan as the first stage. Yeah. So the idea that anarchism would be amazing, well,
right.
Tell that to some Tutsis and some Hutus.
Sure, that's right. You're right. You're right. Because I think there's a very good chance that it would break into fiefdoms.
It would.
I mean, look at the dynasties and look at Japan. Japan was a series of fiefdoms. It didn't have a central government for a long time. China didn't either.
China's history is one of my favorite novels is The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is one of the great Chinese novels. And the opening line is, "It is a truth that has been long acknowledged that anything that has been long united must be divided, and anything that has been long divided must be united."
Wow.
And that's Chinese history.
Wow.
The country unifies, it splits up, the kingdom's war, it unifies, it splits up, the kingdom's war, again and again and again. And that's the point, is it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's, there's an Arab saying that it's better to live 1,000 years under tyranny than one day in anarchy.
No, I don't know about that. But
that's one perspective. But I think.
But it is true that their tyranny, man does have. Part of our biology, I would argue, from my experience, is that there seems to be a biological predilection to control over the person next to you.
Well, and then once you concentrate that power, then you create the problem of absolute power corrupting absolutely, which is why you then need the next stage of society, which is rule of law.
Yeah.
And, and so
checks
on and
and
so
balances,
forth in the whole thing.
Thank you, founding fathers.
Right. But
hey, Michael Malice, let's be careful about how you talk about our founding fathers. you North Korean plant. I love that guy, though.
Yeah. But there's a reason why. I mean, that's the point. It's not that monopoly on violence is the be all and end all. There are huge problems there, which is why there are levels of society beyond that original stage of society, and it's possible that there are definitely things that we can do now that we've reached democracy to do democracy better.
Yeah.
So. But that's not to say that obviously it's easy to see the problems of the coercive power of government, but when you think about a situation like Rwanda or a situation of, the former Yugoslav republics where the national government breaks down and you end up with clan warfare, tribal warfare, it's not a situation you want to live in.
No, it's not. 100%. I living where I do and watching my kids go to school and the garbage truck comes and there's a pipeline of food and there's somebody who making sure my food isn't poisonous. I really appreciate all those things.
Yeah.
I really do. And that's the thing about quote unquote libertarians like myself. I'm a libertarian until, I do benefit a great deal from organization and from, I do believe in the marketplace first and foremost, but I will say that I don't know what it's like to live in a libertarian society, really. We come pretty as close as we can in this country, though we're losing a lot of that. But there are, as we said, there is a need. There are positive aspects to central organization and control to an extent.
Bryan, I'm really proud of you for saying that.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
But I think that's the thing is it's not that the problem is that we are in essence with the Republicans, the Democrats, libertarians, all these different groups. It's like the scholasticists arguing about how many angels you can fit on the head of a needle. It all becomes very, very abstract. And the grounding force in all of this is human biology. Human biology allows us to see and understand and make sense of these issues. So if you look at an issue like welfare, for example, the Democrats have a legitimate point, but so do the Republicans. Because what the Democrats are arguing about is they're saying, listen, if people don't have food, if they're hungry, they can't think. That's true. Students need school lunches, otherwise they can't think in school.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you're talking about the Republicans and they're talking about how welfare makes people dependent and all of these sorts of things, biologically what they're talking about is a phenomenon known as learned helplessness, which is what Martin Seligman writes about. So then, but once you understand, they're talking about two different aspects of human biology, both of which are totally legitimate, then the question becomes, how do you design the system such that you're ensuring that people aren't starving unnecessarily so that they can, learn in
what
school
is the
and
unification theory?
That's exactly, but you're trying to figure out, and then the conversation becomes totally different because we would agree, I think, all that people being so hungry they can't think is certainly not good. How are they going to find a job? How are they going to do any of these sorts of things? But we would also agree that people reaching a state of learned helplessness because of dependency and all these sorts of things is also not helpful. So how do you design a system that understands these competing aspects of human nature and that is able to produce the best possible outcome on average, factoring on both of those factors?
I think we're going to end on that question because it's a good question to ponder. I think that we have solved a lot of problems,
Bryan, I think
in this 40 minutes.
Bryan, I think you're maybe giving us a little too much credit.
I don't know about that.
Bryan.
There's a reason they call this podcast the mother of all podcasts.
Do they officially call it that now?
Well, because we give birth to all the big ideas, Hunter, and we also give birth to all the solutions to those big ideas. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen,
you're midwifing those ideas.
If you want to send a check in, if you want to send in a check of thanks
or a money order,
send it to bryancallen.com.
Go
to my website.
Is that what it is? bryancallen.com an address. Like if I put that on an envelope, will the U.S. Postal Service deliver it?
Yeah, they'll send it right to my website.
Does the Postal Service do that now?
I find myself dreaming of having a lot of money. I would like to make, I want just $20-30 million.
That's not much.
Yeah. Well,
what are you going to do with your $20 or $30 million, Bryan?
Well, I would just want to. I don't know. I would have a really good wine list, and I wouldn't. I'd probably stop doing everything. So
maybe that's not so.
It's not so
good.
What
thing. You're saying is you'd become a wino.
I'd become a wino. Yeah, you're right. I'd spend a lot of time in Napa Valley, and I would wear really nice wool, silk, cotton, Well, I'd wear fabric. And I would preen. I would pontificate. I would sip good wine, eat outstandingly rich food. I would take my exercise in the form of tennis, a gentleman's boxing match, which would mean I'd hire professionals to not hit me, but I would hit at them, and then I would hang out with my friends.
Bryan, can I ask you something?
Sure.
How different is that from your current life?
Very, very little difference. I'm just not in Napa Valley. Calabasas is
as close as you get. So
yes.
So you just be in a slightly different wine growing region? Is that what you're saying?
Fuck off, Hunter. Why do you have to ruin all my fun?
Well, but what I'm pointing is you're living the Bryan Callen dream already.
You might be right about that, brother.
Yeah,
you
really are.
I get to go to Tempe, Arizona, and do stand-up comedy, which is crazy.
And they have probably really good tamales there.
I hope I sell a lot of tickets.
I think you will, Bryan. I believe in you.
Listen, everybody, even if you're not in Tempe, just buy tickets online.
And even if this is airing after...
Who gives a shit?
Just buy tickets.
Just buy tickets in retrograde.
Do you think you should be able to do that, retroactively buy tickets?
Yeah.
Why not? As a way of supporting the artist, even if you're not there?
Well, just send it to bryancallen.com.
That's right. How much would you love selling out after the show was over?
Oh, hey, Brian, good news and bad news.
You sold out.
You're totally full for the Tuesday show, but you're back in LA.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have to say. Peace.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.